I'm Adam Moz, and this is Moz Models.
Hi folks, and welcome back. Today we're actually going to look at some new hardware from FrSky. Specifically, this is an Archer Plus GR6FB. Now, FrSky recently released 4 new receivers with the FB suffix. And these are very interesting receivers because they're not what you would expect. Offhand, you would expect these receivers are going to be a version of the Archer Plus R6 or GR6 or the TW R6 or GR6 with the ability to set FBus on the PWM ports. That's not quite what they are. Now they are variants of those receivers. So there is a Archer Plus R6FB, GR6FB, and a TW R6FB and GR6FB. Denoting the Archer Plus, which are Access and ACCS TD16V2 receivers, and the TWs, which are twin receivers. There is not a TD equivalent of them. Right now, FrSky does only one super small TD receiver in the TDMX. All the other TD series are relatively large and unsuited for, say, a DLG application. The TW series is really FrSky's answer to I want LoRa, I want the extra robustness of the modern link, but I've got something tiny to put it in. That's what twin's for, and that's why there's twin versions of these receivers, but not tandem. But, to be clear, the physical packaging is just like the non-FB versions. In fact, it's identical except for the label. And these are receivers with SBus in. They do support redundancy. So you get your 5 sets of pins here, and there's another one there along with the 6-pin header. You can see that. That's a standard 6-pin header with all the usual stuff and the usual pinout. Like all the new receivers, 0 to 35 volts on AN2, so you do not need a FBVS01 or a homebrew voltage divider if you want to monitor pack voltage. 0 to 35 volts, that should be good up to and around an 8S pack. Definitely 7S, but probably 8S. Now, you'll notice, however, that when you actually look at it, it says FB next to each of those pins. That's because this receiver has no PWM capability. None whatsoever. This is a serial receiver only. And it's actually a 7-port selectable one because each of these ports is essentially ganged with the S-port on the 6-pin header, so the common, and they can be set to FBus, F-port, or S-port when using this in access mode. That means it's perfect to pair with this. That's an exact 5700 series DLG servo. This is really the pairing that this is designed for. You've got a tiny little aircraft. You want to use these high-end, excellent telemetry-enabled servos, but your tiny receivers only have one FBus port, which is on the 6-pin header and can't handle the current load. In this case, you can run 4 of these, or even 6 of these, if you've got a 6-servo DLG or F5K ship off of there, or you can even run one of the shiny new Neuron 2 ESCs. So, that's a Neuron 2. Right now there's only a 60 and an 80 available, which is really overkill. You wouldn't put these in a DLG, but you might put them in, say, a F5J ship. And this is fully FBus capable as well. I will do more on the Neuron 280. This particular one's going in the mall, because the mall cooked its ESC just in time for the Neuron 2s to come out. So I'm just going to grab my radio, and so what we're working through here, we're going to, let's just power this guy on. You can see it came up and bound nicely. So I have had this connected in, you can see I've got a few receivers here. I've been testing the GR6FB, and this one's a GR6, that means it's got a Vario. I also have an Archer Plus R6 that I was testing it against just to figure out how the two work differently. So we're going to go into the GR6FB. We're going to go into receiver options. First thing to note, no PWM settings. That's because you've got no PWM ports. The second thing to note, telemetry port is going to be S port by default. Standard for the Archer Plus receivers. You will need to go in there and make sure it's set to FBus. SBus, you can set to SBus 16 or 24. This does have SBus out. And you've got the other standard ones. So you've got telemetry 25 milliwatt. You've got high PWM speed, which is completely irrelevant in this particular case. But again, unified firmware, you're occasionally going to get settings that aren't relevant. So the beauty of unified firmware is you got one firmware file. The downside is, well, sometimes it's a little bit weird. So we've got the telemetry port set to FBus, and that sets all 6 pins and the S port connector on the 6-pin header to FBus. So I'm just going to move this out there. We're going to bring this back, and I'm going to show you what happens. First off, let's plug in a servo and power cycle it so it fully detects, if I recall correct. So it's a little hard to hear. Hold on for 1 second. I'm just going to dig out see if I've got a servo arm handy so you can see that move, since you can't really hear it move. You can see, okay, so now I dug out the exact servo arms for my 5700s. And this, to be exact, is, I believe, a 5701. Yeah, it's an H5701 servo in the exact line. So that's a high voltage ultralight servo. This one is 6.5 grams, and it is 31 ounces of torque on 8.4 volts and 0.09 seconds. So it's fast, it's powerful for its size. This is going to blow any standard 9 gram out of the water. But you can see that now. I've got this nice little S9101. I'll show you what happens when you plug in a PWM servo on this. I'll just plug it into port 1. And absolutely nothing. It's actually being nice. This is an FBus mode. I noticed in S port mode, this will actually twitch because the packet rate in S port mode is much slower. It's slow enough for an analog servo to pick up as a series of PWM pulses it doesn't understand. FBus is higher speed, and therefore it's just this constant voltage level from the perspective of an analog servo. But you're getting nothing. It's on port 1, and absolutely nothing. I'm wiggling, and I do have ailerons on port 1, on channel 1 here. So you can see the difference. FBus servo works fine. And of course, if we bring that back here, so let's go back, boom, ARC settings, let's go to telemetry, and you can see I've got, this is labeled as servo 1 right now. It's 32 Celsius, it's getting 6.6 volts out of that LiFi pack I'm running it on. It's not really pulling a much, you can see as I wiggle it, it's starting to pull a bit of curvo, and the status is okay. So you're getting all the telemetry from the FBus servo. And that is really the FB series in a nutshell. There's one caveat. If you are an ACCST user, because you cannot remap the ports, and because FBus is not really supported in ACCST, you only get S port on the pins. This becomes a serial receiver with a built-in S port hub for ACCST users. Now I can see some really cool uses for this. For example, I have an Aura 5 light. And if I want to run that Aura 5 with actual telemetry sensors, it's a whole lot easier for me to stick one of these in next to it, plug S-Bus out into the port B on the Aura, and then I can just plug my telemetry sensors into the PWM pins. And that'll work even in ACCST D16. The other caveat is these things don't like the NPMs so much. There's been some challenges with the Archer Plus series receivers and NPMs. It comes down to two things. One is NPMs on 1.3.3.20 and older did not quite understand how these things were binding. It was working fine with an XJT, working fine with any FrSky XJT or XHT module or Tyrannus, Horus, tandem or twin radio running in D16 mode. That all worked, but the NPM didn't. Mike Blanford of ER9X, FrSky 9X fame and Uni firmware fame did put out an update. It's in 1.3.3.27, which is not released yet, but you can get builds out there. It's flyable. And that solves it for most of the Archer Pluses, although they are pickier about your fine-tuning setting. But the FBs don't seem to work with it at the moment. I'm not sure if they're just even more selective or there's something else missing in there, but there's a little bit more development that's needed on the NPM side there. So right now, yeah, these things, great little receivers for DLG. If you're running twin, even better. You get the LoRa long-range 2.4 capability on a Twin Light Pro or Twin X Lite. And if you're not running, the modern FBus servos, these also do have a lot of utility for situations where you're running S-Bus into a flight controller, but you want to be able to have S-Port or F-Bus for telemetry and an enhanced telemetry. First off, you don't have to solder anything, unlike an Archer Plus RS or TWMX or TDMX. There's no soldering required, it's just plug and play. These things become a hub. That's actually not something I'd even thought of when I originally heard of these, but it's got some real advantages in a setup like an Aura or Boom RC AR Smooth Flight or a power box where you're running S-Bus into them, and then you want to have a GPS module, a Vario, or something else. Even if they're doing S-Bus or S-Port out, you can get that all wired up really nice. No soldering, no mucking around, because you're only using a handful of the wires off the 6-pin connector. They'll work very nicely in that. But, caveat, they're not interchangeable with the non-FB versions, because the non-FB versions are 6 PWM ports, and these are 0 PWM ports as it stands. So be very careful when you're ordering. Don't mix the FB version and the non-FB version. Get the one you want. If you want essentially an Archer RS that you don't have to solder, and you don't mind it being a little bit bigger, these are a great drop-in replacement. Plus, you've got an F-Bus or S-Port hub built in, but not a drop-in replacement if you're using PWM servos. And remember, you can't put S-Bus on the pins, so in that situation, if you wanted S-Bus on the pins or something like that, it's not quite a replacement. It's F-Bus only in 8-axis mode. It's S-Port only in ACCST mode. Of course, you can run S-Port in axis mode if you really want to. I don't see a lot of utility for that unless you've got old sensors. But there you have it. That is the Archer Plus R6FB, GR6FB, and the TW R6FB and GR6FB. They all work essentially the same way. This one is the Archer Plus. The difference really is what are your RF options. In this case, it's access and with limited functionality, ACC ST D16 V2. In the twin case, it's twin.